this, kindly note if you have a question to put the question in the chat so that we can also review as we present. So once again, welcome to this webinar. We are very privileged to have you here. And I think we are going to begin now. My name is Anne Maina from the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya, and I'll be moderating this session. We're going to begin with a few welcome remarks from one of the sponsors and the planners of this meeting, AfriTAP, Barbara Ntabiriweke. And we're doing this in collaboration with AfriTAP, the ETC group, AFSA, and all the partners here, including our speakers from Leiden University, Grain, and Biba Kenya. So Barbara, you have the floor. Kindly give us a few welcome remarks before we begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much for making time to attend this very important webinar. I'll not go so much into detail, but just to welcome you on behalf of AFSA and AfriTAP and ETC Group. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and we really appreciate the support that we've gotten. This is a series of webinars that are going to shed light on issues of the digital landscape, and especially in Africa. Kindly remember you can access the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and also kindly introduce yourselves on the chat so that we can begin. We're going to begin our webinar with our first speaker, a very talented young lady, Susan Nakachwa. She's a program officer for Africa at Grain, an international organization that supports small-scale farmers and food sovereignty. She is based in Kampala, Uganda, and she works on research and advocacy around seeds, land, trade, policy, and the growing influence of corporate corporations over African food systems. Susan collaborates with grassroots movements to defend biodiversity, traditional knowledge, and farmer autonomy across Africa. Susan, you have the floor, and thank you very much for participating. Kindly, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Anne, and good evening, everybody. I would just like to request to share my screen.
Your sound is not that very good, dear Susan. If you would like checking your headsets before we start, please, for the interpretation purpose.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I think, Susan, now you should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Susan, we cannot hear you. You're muted.
I am not able to share my screen just yet. I don't know why.
Okay. We have made you co-host. You should be able to.
Okay.
So as she prepares, once again, welcome to everyone who has joined this webinar. As I said earlier, it's a series of webinars that we are doing together with AfriTAP, the ETC group, and AFSA. And we are doing this to build capacity of partners across Africa and the North on digital agriculture and digital systems and the effect that they're having on our communities and even the livelihoods of people in Africa. And we very much appreciate your presence. Kindly, if you have a question, please put it in the chat so that speakers, once they're through, can be able to respond to the questions. Remember, we have the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Susan, are you able now? Please also remember to
I'm not,
introduce
I'm,
yourself.
I'm not able to. I am not able to, but I can just talk off of my presentation and then I can share it later.
Okay, then.
You
You
can
can
also
also
share
share.
it via email so that we project it for you.
Perfect. Let me do that.
So we're very privileged to have people from diverse backgrounds. I can see many people from Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, from the north, and we really appreciate the interest in understanding these issues. Kindly feel welcome. I see also Barbara from Togo and many others from Malawi, Ellen and others. Please feel welcome. Kindly introduce yourself on the chat box so that we can be able to have to know who's here. Susan, now you have the floor.
Okay, sharing it now with it should be with your face, I think. Faith, I've shared it with you now.
Susan, you can begin as Faith.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to share that the digital migrations, the digital platform space on the African continent started around, we started hearing about digitalization in general around the year 2014. And that sort of gave me a space to open up when the digital migration, when digitalization became a thing on the African continent. So way back in 2014, digitalization started happening, but it's not the single sole moment that digitalization became a thing for the African continent, but it encompasses, just generally digitalization encompasses broadcasting, mobile banking, e-governance, e-commerce, and different sectors, including agriculture. But I'm going to focus a bit on the conversation around digitalization, especially with the beginning of digital migration, because this is the time in 2014 when we started hearing about digitalization, and this trend sort of started building from there. So the process of digital migration is basically switching from analog to digital broadcasting, mainly for television and radio. And digital migration plays a critical role in Africa's digital transformation. And this is because it pushes for the conversion of existing analog signals to digital and allows for improved quality in broadcasting, which is still out, the jury's out on that, and more channels and the release of valuable frequency around the spectrum. And why was this important? Because this is a space where there was redemption of analog terrestrial channels on the spectrum. So you used to hear about UHF band for television viewing, and then it became digital data and digital viewing of different channels. Faith, have you got the presentation now? Thank you. And within that, my apologies, sometimes I tend to speak really fast. My apologies to that interpreters, but I will try to finish in time, but also to go slow for everybody to hear me. But to go on the third slide, so I am at the point where I'm talking about the redemption of analog terrestrial channels to a digital dividend, basically what we call the digital dividend that includes freeing up space on the spectrum for mobile broadband. And this is because digital platforms and digitalization in general needs a lot of space to be able to function. So when space was given off from the analog channels, it meant that for every one analog channel that was closed, 8 digital channels were attained. And this was important because, let's go to the next slide. And it was important because it made way for the African Union now to come in and talk about digitalization and also enable the process to go in. So the first step in making digitalization a possibility was around digital migration, to be able to create the space for the digitalization process and digital platforms as well to happen and to take place. So how are African governments enabling digitalization because digital issues must and should go beyond national level for them to function well and even be successful. They must go beyond state boundaries. So there's a need for the harmonization of policies. There's a push for multilateral and multi-stakeholder collaboration, as well as a formulation, coordination, and harmonizes across national jurisdictions. So the processes that we see, the regulations that we see even around the digital trade and e-commerce provisions within to enable the move for digitalization to happen and to be accelerated as well. And these are some of the tenets of the African Union, even within its different agendas that it's pushing. So the digital trade protocol of the African Union is one that is very important and one to look out for, because first of all, there is a promise that we have a unified regulatory framework or a digital trade that is enabled across the African continent, but also facilitate cross-border data flows, enhance cyber security, and promise across the continent. The reality of that, though, is that
sorry, Susan, would you mind putting off your video, because we are not getting you sometimes. If you can put off your camera so that we can have enough band for you. It's cutting off. I'm sorry.
Okay. No problem. So the reality is that there's minimal domestic regulations, and this we have to look out for, because countries cannot regulate effectively after the digital trade protocol and the intentions that it has in place do become effective and are implemented. So there's a provision for tech companies with operational freedom at the expense of democratic and social interests. And for a lot of African nations, we are seeing that, as well as surveillance capitalism and tampering with privacy situations across the continent. And of course, we look through further harmonization of the digital space on the African continent with regulations through Agenda 2063, which aims to achieve technological transformation and a developed digital economy by 2023, as well as a digital transformation strategy for the African continent, which will be spoken about a bit later. But just to start the conversation around digital platforms, these ones are used to facilitate the exchange of information, goods, and services. And some of the examples are there. But the main thing to take away from this is that the digitalization agenda needs a community to be able to exist and to grow. And these, like you see, they're in the marketplace, they're in payment areas, they're in the community, they're in communication, and search engines, and all of that are part of the digital platforms and the digitalization process that's happening across the continent. And the digitalization agenda became very popular around around the time of COVID. Digital migration also pushed it further and accelerated it, and also the growth and use of cell phones across the continent has also facilitated the growth of the digital platforms and the digital spaces across the continent. And just to say that some of the most popular ones that we know across the continent, the Airtel Money, Mobile Money, Tigo Cash, Vodafone, and some farming apps that have developed over time. There are so many others, but I thought I would share these ones for a start, so that you can also jog your thinking into some of the ones that are domestic to the areas where you are in your various spaces and countries. But all of this, and as I summarize, mean that information has become a commodity. Agribusiness, big tech and platforms are receiving information and selling it for a profit. There is data harvesting, which is a new gold across the African continent. Like, for example, here, the Kilimo Data Hub, where they say it will be used to register all farmers and fertilizer sellers. So there's a deliberate move to push for the for fertilizers and chemical inputs into farmers areas of operation, and also getting people into the banking sector. So the banking sector is also now paying people into that. I think everybody has come across M-Pesa. You've come across the different platforms where you have to pay money, and all of this was possible because of the digital platform. I mean, the digital space that was created for processes like this. And if you ask yourself, what do the other countries use their digital spaces for? Some of them use it for for emergency services like hospitals, and they also use it for security, which a lot of times becomes a bit problematic for the African continent when we start talking about emergency services that are not available at the moment, and therefore they can't reach us in time. The penetration of internet access across the continent also has an implication of how the digital space is being used. And these are questions that we need to use. To ask, what happened to the spectrum when we migrated? And that's a critical one, because that's a conversation that should have happened across different countries, as opposed to just migrating and giving priority to to platforms like mobile broadband, as opposed to national priorities or even the citizens and consumers' priorities. And there's also poor data collection under the guise of extension service offers and access to information. So the cost of migration moved to the consumer. Please note that before people migrated, before countries migrated from analog to digital, all the cost of consumption of digital content was met by the providers. So, for example, if it was a TV station, that TV station paid for that content to be turned into analog. When all countries migrated, the cost to turn that transmission into digital became the one for the consumer. Hence the discussion around set-top boxes, the existence of TV apps, the existence of DSTV, Mnet products across the continent is because now you have to buy a set-top box to be able to consume media. And we have to talk about the big role around public broadcasting and its role in improving agriculture, in improving our health, which was taken away. Public broadcasters now have to use private information. So access to information across the spectrum because of digitalization has really dropped. And this is important information within agriculture, within health, within development, and all of that. There's, of course, no space for the informal economy. So the case of food vendors in Abidjan that have been, for example, pushed off the streets and they cannot sell their produce, and we're increasingly finding them going home to prepare their food from home or do their business from home and coming online and coming back into a trap of not being able to sell as much as they used to, and also the dangers that we know from the apps that and platforms that are available today. And lastly, as I close, there's a contestation and a discussion around altering diets and nutrition by influencing dietary options, choices, eating behaviors, and even appearance. And I'd like to close with that picture because it's very critical on how the rise of digital platforms has started criminalizing previously sort of like providers that we had. So the women vendors that you see, the street vendors, the food systems, and basically livelihoods across the continent have been greatly altered. Thank you very much.
Very much, Susan. We really appreciate that presentation showcasing for us how digitalization came and some of the drivers of the digitalization and the costs incurred and issues related to harmonization. And like now you can have M-Pesa Global. Even if I'm in London, I can access my M-Pesa and the amount of data harvesting that goes on with these digital platforms. So much appreciated. Kindly remember, for questions, please post them on the chat so that our speakers can begin looking at them and identifying how or answering them, even as we move to the next speaker, who is Professor Matt Canfield, an associate professor at the University of Leiden. He's an associate professor of law and society in the law and development at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He's a scholar activist that has worked with African movements to support food sovereignty. He's currently the principal investigator of ADG Food, a transnational research project that's exploring how data governance can support equitable and sustainable food systems. So, Professor Matt Canfield, you have the floor. Please begin your presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. And are you seeing my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Can
great.
see.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So thanks so much for having me. My name's Matt Canfield. I'll turn off my video to make it to make the stop video. Okay. So I'm going to just briefly talk based on a report and more than a year of research that I did with Biba Kenya. That our next speaker, Gideon, will speak really to the report we did, but I'll just provide sort of a big picture overview of what's going on in terms of digital agriculture and some of the key important players that we might think about as we're thinking about various issues that Susan just talked about. So generally, we tend to think about agritech as this big business. It's largely private sector driven. A lot of the applications that we know come from the private sector. These are just a few that, for example, are big ones that are in Kenya, which is really the major hub for agritech on the continent of Africa. And these types of applications, they do a bunch of different things. Some of them, the most of them, offer digital advisory services, so providing information to farmers. And oftentimes those are bundled with information about inputs, what to buy, seeds, fertilizer, pesticides. But there's also digital financial services, things like digital procurement for markets, other kinds of e-commerce. So there's a range of different approaches, but one of the things that we're seeing is most of the times all of these are increasingly bundled. You know, advisory services, marketing services, buying inputs. And we tend to think, and Gideon will talk more about what we found. This is from the Gatsby report that did a landscape study of across all of the African or in East Africa, what are the major businesses that are operating. But one of the things that I think is really important is that we have to step back from thinking about it only as something that's private sector driven. What we know is actually that there's a lot of different actors who are involved in supporting the digital agricultural sector. And largely that is because of the way that we started to value data over the past couple of years with the development of machine learning and other kinds of computational power. And with a colleague, I analyzed all of the different international players that are supporting digital agriculture and what is called datafication, the kind of growth of data. And we developed the term data productivism, which values data as being intrinsically socially desirable that everybody can benefit from. It's a win-win narrative that we see underlying the support from many different institutions. And oftentimes, this idea supports ideas of creating more climate resilience, that it supports innovation, that it fills gaps in the data that countries, especially in the majority world, lack, that it will help fulfill food security and improve food security for small-scale farmers, as well as market efficiency. And this is really a very prominent narrative that we see being supported across the entire digital agricultural ecosystem. And this includes not just the private sector, but foreign aid, international aid organizations, as well as government. And so the private sector really is an important player in this. So this is in 2024 where we're seeing a lot of agricultural funding for agri-tech. And over the past decade, about 2.4 billion US dollars has been contributed to the digitalization of African agriculture. Now, Kenya is really at the forefront of this, but there's other big players like Nigeria, Morocco, Egypt, South Africa. And the thing is that this money is coming not just from the private sector. That peaked at about 50% in 2023, but really that's gone down since then. In the meantime, we've seen other kinds of actors fill that gap. One of the most important of those is digital or development finance institutions, which AFSA has been exploring as one of the key pathways for the promotion of industrial agriculture. And so the African Development Bank, but also foreign development banks like FAMO from the Netherlands, where I'm based, who also fund these investment organizations like AgDevCo and EDFI that are funding directly to agribusiness. There's also non-commercial funders, philanthropies like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and these agri-tech accelerators that we're seeing develop across the African continent that are often funded by these same philanthropies. So just to give you an example, one agri-tech accelerator that's based in Kenya is Mercy Corps Agrifin, and they really operate as an important organization that supports the entire digital agricultural ecosystem. And one of the things that's really interesting about them is also their funders. Their main funders are the Gates Foundation and the Bayer Foundation, and they used to be funded by the MasterCard Foundation. And here what we see is philanthropy that really are the three sectors that will tend to benefit from digitalization: tech, agribusiness, and finance. And so we have this entire ecosystem that is being funded a lot by philanthropy to support the private sector development in agri-tech. Another example of an agri-tech accelerator is the World Bank's 1 Million Farmer platform. And the World Bank's 1 Million Farmer platform, which operates in Kenya, they have worked with over 24 different startups across 11 counties, or 26 counties actually, in Kenya. They have partnered with AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution Africa, Microsoft, and the UN, as well as Rabobank. And they aim to support actual startups, but also to create and aggregate the data in order to help build this ecosystem for agri-tech. Now, one of the things that's really important, though, is that agri-tech itself is not very profitable, especially on the African continent. And that is for one major important reason, which is that many farmers don't want to pay for digital agricultural services. One of the things that Gideon will tell you that we found in our research is that most learn from other farmers, from traditional extension services, and from trusted sources. And so for agri-tech right now is not very profitable and primarily relies on donor grant funding. Now, the other reason that it's not very profitable right now is because each of these different startups that are beginning are competing to accumulate data and extract data on farmers. And that competition over data and a lack of what is often called a foundational data source so that everybody has access to prohibits the growth of private agri-tech. And this is really where we start to see government step in. This is from an AU report that describes how to lay the regulatory foundations for the development of private agri-tech. And the thing that's important here is that the regulation of agri-tech is made up of two wings, we could say. One is traditional agricultural policy and governance, and the second is more digital or ICT governance, particularly around data. So another way we could put that is that developing a digital agricultural infrastructure really requires, on the one hand, agricultural policy to do so, as well as what is increasingly being called a digital public infrastructure that can support data collection and share that data. So I'll just say very briefly how this works in Kenya based on our study that we did that Gideon will get more into. But in Kenya, we see agricultural policy coming from the agricultural sector transformation and growth strategy. And digitalization is very central to that. Kenya has developed a policy framework for digital and data transformation in agriculture, which aims to develop e-incentives. And this e-incentive system involves the monitoring of farmers at every level when they get the e-incentive to their mobile phone, what agro dealer they go to, if they are using it, how successfully they have used this e-incentive. And one of the things that's important within this e-incentive system is it not only allows for the government to monitor how farmers are using subsidies, but also it's tied with really a traditional subsidy that is often going to fertilizer that is not an agroecological method, but through external fertilizer. And that's one way that the government both collects data as well as encourages digitalization. Now, the second aspect of this is the digital public infrastructure, that is, developing a framework for the collection and sharing of farmer data. And that includes different aspects. One, it includes law and policy. So developing data protection and data governance, which the Kenyan government has been doing over the past 5 years. Over the past 2 years, it's developed a database of over 6 million farmer profiles through the Kiame system, the Kenya Integrated Agricultural Management Information System, in which young farmers or agripreneurs were collected data across every subward and very, very granular data on every aspect of their farm, including GPS coordinates of where they farm. And finally, developing a protocol to share that data with the private sector to enable the public to enable the digital agricultural ecosystem. And so this leads us with really important questions about what digitalization is doing. What kinds of agriculture are being promoted? What model of development is being pursued? How are small-scale farmers being supported? What kinds of support exist for agroecology? Are territorial markets being prioritized or only external markets for export? Is food sovereignty a policy goal? And in the digital public infrastructure, we need to ask questions like, what kind of data is collected and by whom? How is data protection defined and enforced? What rights do farmers have over their data? And do farmers have a share in how data is shared or monetized? And who controls this digital infrastructure? And are there mechanisms for democratic accountability and oversight? So these are some questions to start thinking about. And now I will pass it back to Gideon, who will talk more about our study of Makueni County.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Before Gideon comes in, let me take the opportunity to introduce him. Gideon Moya is a young farmer and an environmentalist with a bachelor's degree in environmental science, studies and community development from Machakos University. He's been very active in terms of work on agroecology and environmental conservation. He currently spends his days working for the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya as a programs assistant, where he continues to train farmers on agroecological techniques such as integrated pest management, market linkages, media engagement, indigenous seed preservation, and production of bioinputs. He's been very active in the research that they did with Matt Canfield, and we'd like to welcome him to come on board now and present. Welcome, Gideon. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Are we there?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you
for the
click present to put in present mode.
there.
Perfect.
Okay. So we had a research that we did with Matthew. This was Biba Kenya in conjunction with the University of Leiden. The title for the research was Connecting Communities or Corporations. That's the question. Digital Agriculture, Food Sovereignty, and Agroecology in Kenya. The research was done by Matthew Canfield, who presented just before me. There was also Anne Maina and Gideon Muya. We went to the field to collect data from our farmers. So I'll first start with a brief of what BIBA does. BIBA Kenya is a network of 51 member organizations. We are mainly made up of community-based organizations, or as many people call it, CBOs. We're also made up of NGOs, faith-based organizations or church organizations. Then we also have farmer groups, which is our main beneficiary. Our main objective is to ensure that the public is aware and alert on issues concerning the environment, agriculture, food safety, health, and biodiversity. As you can see below, that is a picture of our team. That's the BIBA team. We are a very young team. So one thing with the research, and one thing we came to notice as we were initiating the research, is Kenya is at a crossroads. And we are at the crossroads. Let me switch off my video. So Kenya is at a crossroad. The crossroad we are at is we are in between the green revolution and the digital revolution. The green revolution is the industrial type of farming where farmers are being encouraged to rapidly grow their crops using inputs, especially chemical inputs, using monocropping and all other dangerous or unsustainable methods of farming. And number two, we are in the digital revolution where people are digitizing everything. Most of the things are going into the digital space where data is now being pushed as the forefront, the most valuable resource. And you'll notice that many of these digital platforms that are being introduced into the agricultural sector do not come from tech companies such as Microsoft, Tesla. They do not come from tech companies such as Apple. They are actually being fronted by agrochemical companies. And when we were doing the research, we had three objectives. One was to assess the impact of digital agriculture in Kenya. We just simply want to see how digitalization is affecting the small-scale farmer. Number two, we wanted to look at it from an agroecological point of view, how these digital platforms, how these digital technologies are affecting our food systems from an agroecology point of view. And number three, we wanted to look at the issues that the small-scale farmers are facing in terms of data governance and what we can do or how we can liaise with the government to create people-centered digital agriculture policies. So I'll give a brief introduction of the contextual analysis of Kenya right now. Kenya is the top destination for agricultural tech investment in Africa, or as people call it, agri-tech. And the large uptake of digital technologies has been attributed to the fact that Kenya is very well connected to the internet. We have currently 98% of our population can access 4G internet, and we still have a significant number of our population that has also transitioned to 5G. We also have digital payment systems such as M-Pesa, which is used, I think right now M-Pesa is even more popular than cash when it comes to transacting in the Kenyan context. But then we have one thing we must notice, which is a very important thing, that yes, as much as these digital platforms are being introduced in Kenya, most of them are being introduced by agri-tech companies. Most of them are being introduced by agri-tech companies. But the most surprising thing that we found out is that these digital platforms are not even profitable. Most of these agri-tech companies that are fronting these digital platforms, they do not make a lot of money from the digital platform. So we came to a very big question. How do they make their money? How do they actually make their money? Because you'll notice farmers are very reluctant when it comes to paying for their services. So as a result, many of these companies rely on monetizing of their data and earning commissions on agricultural inputs. Again, monetizing on data and agricultural inputs. A key problem is competition over data. You'll find that very many companies tend to go to the ground to collect a lot of data under the name of farmer registration. But in real sense, it's the data that they want to monetize. The type of technologies range from SMS messaging services. Yeah, we get SMS messaging services on weather, market prices. We have mobile phone and web-based applications. These are like WhatsApp. We have Plantix and anything that the small-scale farmer can save on their phone. We also have soil sensors. This one is used mostly in the field to detect soil conditions such as moisture, nutrient levels, etc. Then we also have drones. Many large-scale farmers have been embracing drones, especially when it comes to pest and disease control. They use drones to spray their farms and to also monitor their farms. We also have satellite and remote sensing. We have AI, which is also becoming very popular, especially in pest and disease control. And we have blockchain technologies. So we'll go straight away into the research. The research was done in Makueni County. Makueni County is on the eastern side of Kenya. And one thing that is characterized in Makueni County is it's an arsal area. It's a bit dry. And we were wondering, why is it that these many digital platforms are being pushed to an arsal area, yet we have very many areas that act as food baskets in Kenya? But we looked at Makueni because you'll notice that Makueni has really attracted a lot of interest, especially from Bill Gates through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. So we decided, why not? And from the case study, we were able to conduct 67 interviews, 30 from farmers, and the rest we had from policymakers within Makueni County and the national government. And we also had a few agro dealers. These are agrovets, or the people who sell chemical inputs. Then the methodology we used for the 67 interviews, we had focused group discussions, we had key informant interviews, we also applied the skill of observation once in a while when we were in the farm. And lastly, we had policy analysis, especially the Data Protection Act of 2019. That's the act that protects, that is used when it comes to all data issues in Kenya. We'll also notice one thing that you should keep in mind throughout my presentation, that the average age of the Kenyan farmer right now is 60 years, yet it is still this generation that people are still pushing these digital platforms to, which again we noticed is very unfair. So what are the findings we got? What are some of the findings? So some of the findings, you look at the graph on your right. We look at the first one, figure 3, the services offered by the digital applications. One of the things that we noticed is most digital applications usually market inputs. And when I say market inputs, I mean chemical inputs. These are fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and any other input that the farmer would want. And farmers primarily used general communications apps like WhatsApp and Facebook to share their farming information and market updates. WhatsApp and Facebook were the most popular because they were the most simple for the farmers to use. Specialized agricultural apps like DigiFarm had limited adoption despite partnerships and promotions. Then many farmers reported difficulties in accessing digital platforms. This is because I don't know if it's like this in other African countries, but the data costs, the cost of data bundles, and also the cost of affording a smartphone, they are very high and very unaffordable to most small-scale farmers. Number 2, just like any other digital platform, for a 60-year-old farmer, you notice that these platforms are at times very complex, so they are very hard to use for them. Then number 3, you'll notice that the language barrier. Many farmers around Makueni speak in either Kiswahili or they use their native Kikamba language, but most of these digital platforms are in English. This makes it very hard for them to understand. And last but not least is the lack of trust. Many still do not agree or do not believe that these digital platforms can actually help them the way they want to. Some farmers also, because let me not call them old school, but being that the average age is 60, they are used to the traditional extension services where an extension officer from the government comes personally to your farm, inspects your farm, and gives you solutions. So they still are used to the traditional methods of extension. So when you look at the two graphs, figure 3, you notice that 38% of the digital platforms that we came across are mainly for inputs. They are mainly used to sell or to market chemical inputs. An example is the Bayer app. Another 38% offer advisory services. But even when you look at the advisory services, they'll still go back to inputs. They'll advise you on how to treat a disease using a certain input or a certain chemical product. Then we have 12% went to marketing of the farmer's products and aggregation. Then 8% was for social media, especially marketing, and 4% was for information sharing. Then let's look at who owns these apps. Who exactly owns these apps? So when you go to figure 4, the graph below, the pie chart below, 67% of these applications are owned by the private sector. And we all know that the private sector is here for one thing, profits alone. 13% is owned by the public or the government. 12% is owned by international organizations, which are mainly developmental organizations. And the smallest part of the pie is what is owned by us, the civil society organization. So we have a lot of work to do. Then from the research, we were able to collect our findings, consolidate them. Then we had a workshop. It was an analysis workshop. The analysis workshop had 30 participants. It was held in Nairobi. And these were the goals of the workshop: to analyze the risks that have been posed by these digital applications. Number 2 was to identify the opportunities for agroecology, or where can we actually fuse agroecology with the digital space, because we believe that the digital revolution must be agroecological. And lastly was to develop policy recommendations that would actually help in data governance. So what are some of the key concerns that we saw from the farmers? Because you'll notice that from the 30 farmers that we interviewed, some of the things were common, or some of the problems or concerns were common. One is the high cost of smartphones and data use and data bundle costs. You'll find that smartphones, I think in every country in the world, they're expensive. And you'll also notice that data bundles in Kenya are very, very expensive. When you go to a rural area where Wi-Fi connectivity is very low, many farmers usually depend on the data bundles, which at times can be hard to afford. Number 2 is the language barrier and the complexity of the apps. Some apps are just hard to use. Number 3, the trust issues around data use. Again, many farmers do not know where their data goes to, which is also a very alarming issue. When you ask most of the farmers, when you do registration, do you know where your data is used, where your data goes to or is used for, who accesses your data? They're like, no. Then we ask them, why do you give out your data? They're like, the only reason they give out their data is because they've been promised inputs. That's the whole reason. They're told to register for a certain program or a certain platform, and they're promised inputs. But once they register, they really don't know where their data goes to. Then last but not least is most people prefer traditional extension learning. So the digital divide and inequality, where does this inequality come from? Or why do we believe that the digital divide, the digital revolution is not sustainable? Why do we think that the digital platforms are still not yet adapted as they should by the farmers? One, they are elderly and their income is still very low. Number 2, the apps are misaligned with the farmers' realities. Here, what I mean is that the apps usually push inputs. They are mainly for pushing inputs and for marketing of chemical inputs. But you'll find that an area like Makueni, where the main problem is usually access to clean and stable water supply, because it's an arid or it's an arsal area. So you find that an app is pushing for inputs, but the farmers require water. The apps at times are very misaligned with the farmer needs. Then most tech, again, promote inputs, not sustainability. I'll give an example of a quote. This is what one of the farmers said when we were in the field. Many farmers from my group don't use digital platforms because most of them are old and do not have smartphones. It's our children who use smartphones and they are not farmers. So again, you see the issue of age. We don't understand why people are still pushing the digitalization narrative for a population that is not even interested in the digital space. If it would have been directed more to the youth, I think it would be more sustainable. Then we can look at the risks that have been brought about by the digitalization. Digitalization, we are seeing it as an avenue for corporate capture. Why? Because there is a lot of monetization of farmer data. A lot of farmer data is being sold off, especially to input companies, as a way of them to market their products to the farmers. Then number two, it's tied to input sales and credit systems. You'll notice that when it comes to credit systems where farmers are being encouraged to take loans that will never end, just to ensure that they get inputs to use in their farms, I think this is a cycle of dependency that will need to end. Then there is also a very weakly, it's very weak. The informed consent process is very weak. Farmers do not give clear permission on how their data is used, because even the farmer themselves do not understand how data is being used, and they don't understand the issue of data governance. And lastly, it's a potential for digital land grabs and surveillance. An example is the Kiamis registration process. We had a registration process, a national registration process for farmers in Kenya, and many farmers were giving out comprehensive information such as your land size, your GPS coordinates, how you use your land, information about your family, your title deed number, very personal information. And many of the farmers were afraid that one day they'll die, and then the information that they gave about their land will be used maybe to grab their land, which was also a very big concern for them. So how do we fuse agroecology to the digital world? Digital tools can support agroecology if they enhance local knowledge, because we believe that local or indigenous knowledge that is sourced from the farmer should be the primary source of knowledge in anything. Number two is they need to foster farmer-to-farmer learning. We believe again that the farmer is the primary source of knowledge. It is the farmer who knows most. Number three is promote open source platforms. These digital platforms must be accessible to everyone. That's why we call them open source. And last but not least, they must encourage a participatory design. Here, what we mean is that farmers should be involved from the get-go, or from the first stage of development of these platforms. Then we notice that there are a few agroecological principles that digital platforms can actually adapt. One is diversity, where digital platforms can actually be used to promote and train farmers on diversification when it comes to their farming activities. Let's not only encourage monocropping. Number two is recycling and efficiency. Here we need to minimize waste and use what we have within our farms. Then there's also co-creation and sharing of knowledge. That is the most important. These digital platforms are the best way of sharing information across a wide audience in a very short time. And lastly, to also promote circular and solidarity economies. So the key recommendations, these are the main ones. One, we need to educate farmers on digital rights and data governance, because farmers do not know what is happening within the digital platform and how their data is being used. Number two, we need to co-create inclusive technologies. When we talk about co-creation, we mean the farmer, the digital, the app developer, the technical developer, and us non-governmental organizations, we need to come together and create inclusive technologies. We also need to strengthen data privacy laws, and this can be done through working together with the national and county governments. We also need to integrate agroecology into digital policies. Here we look at the agroecological principles that I spoke about in the previous slide. We need to, anytime we are creating digital technologies, we need to consider this. And lastly, we need to incorporate digital technologies into the National Agroecology Strategy Implementation Framework. In Kenya was able to launch a National Agroecology Strategy last year. And we believe that in its implementation, we need to consider the agroecological digital technologies when we are rolling it out to the farmer. So the final thoughts from the research and from what our farmers were telling us: digital agriculture must serve people, not just platforms. And from the research, we see that agroecology shows us how to connect technology with care, community, and sovereignty. So this is the research, connecting communities or corporations.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you can find it on our website. I'll also share the link on the chat. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you very much, Gideon. This is very much appreciated. A job well done. As I've seen, Dr. Lembo has really said a lot of congratulations to you. We've now finished our presentations and have a few minutes for some question and answer session. I'll give an opportunity. If you have a question, please raise your hand as we begin by looking at some of the questions that have been posted on the chat box. We have a question from Shmuel Yerushalmi. Sorry if I've murdered your name. How development and implementation of biodigital technologies can support improved social and economic well-being of poor and low social economic groups of the population in Africa? How can the development and implementation of biodigital technologies support improvement, social and economic well-being of poor and low socioeconomic groups of the population in Africa? We also had a question from Eric Kirimi where he was asking, specifically digitalization altering diets and nutrition, considering that now people choose food not on nutritional value, but digital trends and food aesthetics. Maybe that was more of a comment, and our panelists can respond to it in the growth of the KFCs and all this. We also had a question from Stephen Mutuku. I had the same thinking, especially in an area like Makueni, many other parts of Kenya. How safe is it for farmers to use common social platforms, especially Facebook, the safety of the digital platforms? And also another question from Teresa Sarasa. Thank you, Matt and Gideon. Really interesting project. I have two questions. Some of the main investors in these digital services, Bayer, the Gates Foundation, have an interest in promoting certain types of agriculture, GM varieties, patented agrotechnologies, which these companies have invested in. How does this influence the kind of consultancy these services provide, the inputs they recommend? I also have a question about the differential effects these digital services would it be interesting to monitor the distribution of benefits achieved from agri-tech? Is it the case with many agriculture technologies such as genetically modified seeds that women and marginalized groups, peoples and poor tend to struggle to access and adapt these innovations, which inadvertently widen inequality gaps? So maybe we can start with those questions. I would welcome Susan to start us off. Susan, there were questions on safety of the digital agriculture and what I've just asked. Teresa had about 2 or 3 questions on GM varieties and the influence of these digital companies and monitoring the benefits of agri-tech. Do you think there are any benefits or it's all doom and gloom? Susan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to go back to the discussion around digitalization and altering diets and nutrition. I know it was a comment, but I think it's really critical for us to start interrogating the role of digital platforms, the different digital platforms, and how the conversations around food and food systems are being affected. And also to relate it back to Gideon's discussion around indigenous knowledge and indigenous varieties. And I would also, within the same breath, like to call your attention again on the digital platform space and the African Union's, I think it was about last week or the week before that. And the African Union, I think, is pushing for a digital registry of different varieties of crops. And that's I think, in 5 countries, in Kenya, in Uganda, and I forget the other countries. But the importance of this conversation is because all of these, putting these varieties out online, and versus us also talking about these protections of these varieties and pushing them as well. And it's important that we start talking about what the future of food systems on the continent looks like, but also the push for ultra processed foods, and also foods like the KFCs that are coming in, and they're easier to access on digital platforms. So it might not be the older generation per se, but the discussion around the alteration of diet, especially for the older ones. I'll put the link of the digital catalog that they've put in place, so that you can also interrogate that, especially for the organizations working on agriculture, because where it's going to be very concerning. And within that same space, I think, just to scroll down, and which is the other question? I can't find it.
Was these companies that are providing the digital technologies, and some of them are own shares, for example, in genetic engineering, is there a risk that they would influence a push towards certain types of agriculture, GM varieties, patented seeds, and also in terms of the digital services? Are we able to monitor agri-tech? And the question on whether it's doom and gloom, or there are some few benefits of these digital technologies.
Well, some would argue that there are benefits, but please note that the whole digitalization process across the African continent did not happen in consultation. It's still very much an elitist, for lack of a better word to use, but an elitist process where there was no consultation with people on the ground. So these are not, and also from Gideon's presentation and also Matt's presentation, you can clearly see that this is a process that is driven by, first of all, industry. It's driven by a bigger motive to make profit. And therefore, although there could be benefits if it is well used and well planned out, the benefits might be far and between because of how we started the process. So there's a bit of a problem there. And then also with regards to GMOs, I think what the catalog that I was talking about, and just really the whole conversation around GMOs, becomes problematic because we do not have a space where we have been given a chance to pronounce ourselves on GMOs. We have not had a space to really have consultations. And the ongoing conversation around GMOs across the continent is the concern around the disappearance of our varieties. And digitalization and these platforms and all this will make things slightly more difficult, and also give access to the replicability of our indigenous varieties very quickly and with no protection. Like, for example, open source seeds, which many are supporting, but there's also a concern around the patents and the ownership of open source seeds once they get into the digital platforms. So it's a bit of a broad discussion, but I know that there should be, and we should be concerned about the spread and fast movement of GMOs with digitalization. The failure and the attack on indigenous knowledge also will definitely be seen, and also the lack of transparency and inclusiveness in the rolling out of certain digital aspects, and also the people behind them and what they are really looking for. Because even though there's a talk around it developing Africa and Africans in general, the willingness, the process, and all of that haven't been as clear and as people-oriented as we would like them to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. The next question directed to Matt and Gideon from Kushang Mishra, and is from India, where similar digitalization processes are taking place in agriculture. So he thanks you for the presentation, but he wants you to talk a little more about data monetization and land grabs using agriculture data. I think we seriously need to see it's not just an African Asian issue, but an issue which concerns everyone in the majority world, especially since money is mostly come from the minority world. The other question is from Salah Gilead. Is there any discussion about a moratorium on further digitalization until balanced participatory dialogues centering farmers and civil society can take place? And also from Kedir Mohammed, how can we use digitalization with less harm to our environment and the food systems? Maybe we can tackle those. I know also Susan maybe later can speak on the issue of the land grabs, but Matt, maybe you can give it a try.
Sure. Well, thank you for the questions. I think there's there's a lot to learn, I think, from the Indian case, of course, and from all over. One of the things that, of course, is concerning about digitalization is, yeah, how data is used. And one of the major concerns is not just land grabs when land information becomes more publicly available and in corporations, but also green grabbing or grabbing of other kinds of resources. So increasingly, we see a lot of projects that are digital agriculture that are seeking to collect information on carbon data and the creation of carbon markets. And this gets to another question about who's actually benefiting from these kinds of digital services. Oftentimes, all of these digital services are offered as promises to small scale farmers to increase revenue, to have opportunity for markets. But the question of what kinds of revenue they'll actually draw on or what kind of dependencies are going to be created, and to what extent also governments are involved in using data to facilitate land grabs are really important questions, especially when it comes to land data. So that's one thing that I think is something that we need to keep monitoring. I think the other thing I wanted to say is that
to deepen.
I think the other thing that is that I wanted to just emphasize is that in our report, one of the things we emphasize is that, digital technologies we think should be evaluated based on what kinds of connections they're actually creating. Agroecology is a practice, a science, a social movement that really is about building connections between people and their environments. And digital technologies can sometimes potentially, we found, actually assist in that. They can create, for example, a lot of the farmer groups that we saw that were text messaging was about sharing good practices, which seems like a great thing. Farmers were creating their own platforms to market some of their products, like fresh milk or fruits. But a lot of the technologies we're seeing were really more extractive in nature. They were seeking to take farmer data and for the purposes of collecting information and offering back insights to farmers on typically what kinds of products to buy. They become a channel for marketing more inputs. And so that's something that I think we should think about when we're evaluating digital technology. And agroecology, either the 10 principles, the 10 elements or the 13 principles offer a good framework to start doing so. And the last thing I just wanted to say is that, there are lots of contexts, small examples where we see digital technologies being used to promote agroecology, whether that's in creating platforms for farmers to sell agroecological products, whether that's in creating a database of agroecological practices. There's lots of different examples, or in co-creating and seed breeding. We've seen that too in Tanzania. But all of these, I think, need a strong assessment on whether they're actually supporting the social and well-being of smallholders. So I'll pass it to Gideon.
Gideon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Matt. I won't repeat what you said about data monetization. I'll just go to how these digital platforms can be used, can be made useful. So can digital platforms be useful? Yes, they can. But if we need them to be useful, we need to make them more sustainable, or I mean more agroecological or more organic. Here I look at 4 aspects. Number 1 is production. We need digital platforms that teach or that are used for knowledge sharing and training and for providing demonstration when it comes to agroecological food production or organic food production. Then we have number 2 on marketing. Digital platforms have proven to be very useful when it comes to marketing. These days, not everyone goes to the market physically like in the past. These days, people even order their food online. You find that also when people are buying food, let me call them aggregators or different companies, they usually use digital platforms to locate farmers. But when I talk about marketing, I'm talking about agroecological food, and I'm also talking about organic inputs or agroecological products, bio inputs, not chemical inputs. Then number 3, we can also use digital platforms for advocacy and to foster a mindset shift. When I talk about a mindset shift, I mean that many people have been talking about that these days people are eating fast food. Digital platforms are being used to sell fast food, and which is very true. Fast food has become very popular, but we can still use these digital platforms to do the opposite, where instead of marketing fast food, we can also use it to market indigenous food and indigenous knowledge. And last but not least is on documentation. You find that there are very many videos about farmers, their success stories. We can use digital platforms to share that. And number 2, we can also use digital platforms as a catalog. As Matt said, through Seed Savers, they were able to create a seed catalog, an indigenous seed catalog where any Kenyan can access it, and you're able to know the availability and accessibility of the different varieties of seed and where you can actually get them. Yes, thank you.
Gideon, let's look at the next set of questions. And Susan, when you come in next, you'll speak more about the issue of land grabs. I know Grain has been doing quite a lot of work on digitalization and land grabs, especially from like the UAE and what's happening, for example, with in the Ngorongoro Crater. We have Victor Okuku. Before that, Dolphin Combo asked, I have a question. How can biodigital agriculture contribute to climate resilience and sustainable food systems in Africa? I'll give that to Susan. Is there a mechanism from Victor Okuku you've put in across to reach out to local farmers about sensitization, including media houses on the analysis we did? I think Gideon, you can answer that. Also, what is the strategy for disseminating the same to farmers from Janet Mumo? We also have Shemwe Yerushalmi on what is the role of international organizations such as the UN and WHO in the development of agri-tech and other biodigital technologies in Africa. And I think Susan, you can, or Matt can handle that. Then what can you say from Patrick of Terramade Smile? What can you say on Facebook, where on issues related to agriculture and social media? Dr. Sarah Olembo asks, there's so much indigenous knowledge that can be tapped using in digital technologies. Secondly, our youth are too inclined into digital technologies to enable them participate in the global economies, yet some of the platform cannot be trusted. Look at our seed collections at the CIGA centers are now up for grabs, causing consumers not to trust this digitally. Thirdly, UNESCO, which was designed to preserve indigenous languages and technologies, is one among the many UN agencies on the chopping board. How can we elevate and promote African cultures, such as the talking drums of Nigeria and other African practices, document and preserve our data from whatever sources? So let's begin with Susan, and then we can have Gideon and then Matt. Susan?
Yes, please. So with regards to land grabbing, I think we have seen a trend across the African continent where a lot of countries are digitizing their land registries. And especially from the mid-1990s, it became very popular. And the argument around that is that it will be easy to formalize and then also push for land management that is sustainable and very clear for every single person to sort of follow the process. However, we're also realizing that this is a process of extracting and making land data available to corporations and investors. And this access to data means that there is a digital land profile somewhere. And with cases that are coming up across the continent, we are seeing that this means that your land can be located very quickly and easily. It can be quantified because it's put somewhere on the line. The argument around traceability of cash crops, like for example, coffee, is also being given as one of the reasons why we need to digitalize land so that there's a follow-up of the standards around the farming of different cash crops that are sold on stock exchanges and the international market in general. But with this, we're also seeing increasingly the conversation around carbon credits becoming very big and very popular because of the process of land registries and land profiles. They can easily identify the spaces where they will be able to pay off any carbon credits and also deal with carbon credit conversations. So we are also arguing that this is replacing existing systems, these new technologies that they have, put control of land and its governance in new hands and different hands, which are not the hands that we normally knew. So it really makes people very vulnerable, and that's something that we have identified. And for example, about some vulnerable communities, like for example, we did some research around communities in a place called Kiryandongo here in Uganda, where the community heard about the land registries, the digital land registries, and they thought it was wise for them to go into the government and get themselves documented. So based on different, the history around this, because these were formerly government ranches from the 1970s that people have taken over. And Kiryandongo becomes very popular because it's also an area where the huge refugee population from the different parts of the world has been settled. And once the communities went into the government, we saw the beginning of land grabs in that area, and a fight between the governments, people being thrown off their land, their livelihoods, and also their cultures and stories from the past, like their burial grounds have been terminated and destroyed since then. And there's an ongoing battle around that. But that's because the communities thought, okay, now that there's a process to register lands and to digitalize the lands, we might as well partake of this to be able to work on being recognized as maybe settlers or people who are sitting on this land and doing something about it. So it really makes people very, very vulnerable, this whole process of digitalization, because it has different motives from what people initially think about it. And that's how it's meant to be marketed, that it's going to help us to govern our land better. But the consequences have been very difficult to deal with for local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Gideon?
Again, thank you. So the question directed to me, is there any mechanisms you've put across to reach out to these local local farmers about sensitization in media houses, mostly local media houses, about the analysis we did? I think the person is basically asking, how can we partner with the media to bring out the report to the farmer? So number one, we basically need to look at the local media stations, because we're talking about the small scale farmer, and we need the radio station or the media station that is closest to the ground. And here we can organize interactive radio talk shows where the farmers can call in, ask questions, and at least share a bit of their experiences when it comes to digitalization. Then number two, we will also need, because these are farmers we are talking about, and you'll find that in Africa, most farmers are found in rural areas, and rural areas many people usually converse in their mother tongue. So we'll need vernacular radio stations who can translate the research into local language and disseminate it to their listeners. Then last but not least, is we need to also train the farmers. We also need to train we need to train the journalists, we need to train the local journalists, so that before they go to disseminate the information to the farmer, They at least also have a brief understanding on agroecology, on agri-tech, and also on data governance. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Matt Canfield?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think I'll just answer the questions that come from Dr. Olembo and Shmuel about international institutions and indigenous and local knowledge. And I'll say one of the things that the UN has been doing, and specifically the Rome-based agencies, so the Food and Agriculture Organization, is really in supporting the development of those digital public infrastructures that I talked about. And especially that for example, in Kenya, the FAO was really involved in supporting the development of collection of farmer data, because to enable digital technologies requires basically gathering a lot of data that can be assigned to a single farmer. Because one of the most expensive things for companies is actually to collect data. So if they can get this data for free from governments, it will enable the digital agricultural economy. And so it's really, the UN is playing a very important role in helping to facilitate this. And I think it's worth, focusing on them in terms of, what kinds of practices, what kinds of regulations should they be promoting in order to ensure that actually this involves a more equitable digital food system. And then in terms of what Dr. Olembo said, I fully agree that there's lots of ways in which digital technologies are also being able to support local and indigenous knowledge, local languages, and certainly they can be. That's not necessarily what we're seeing right now in terms of what's being supported. And when we're looking at what's being supported, it's equally important to think about how digital technologies are being integrated into dominant agri-food policy. So what is the agricultural governance supporting? But in a place like Kenya, because there's a national agroecology strategy, there's also an opportunity to articulate what an alternative approach to data would look like and what an alternative approach to digitalization to support those very components of knowledge that are so essential for agroecological transformations. So I think it's really worth thinking very carefully about, what are alternative models that can be advocated and incorporated into strategies from government to support the kinds of digital technologies that you're talking about, Dr. Olembo.
Matt, there's a question that came from Sarah Gillette from the US. So she's saying, given the negative impacts and the massive human and ecological costs, when you don't have time, might smallholder farmers be interested in considering a boycott or further digitalization? I'm interested in having this conversation in my country, which is the US. Maybe Matt, you can tell us, maybe share on what you think about that as you give your final inputs.
That may be. I don't know whether that would be the most appropriate solution. I know, one of the things that is a really big challenge, of course, is because, for example, in lots of across Africa, but I'll say in Kenya specifically, because I know the government has so reduced support for extension officers and traditional extension that really digital technologies have been sort of provided as the only alternative, the only gap in that process. And in the context of both changing climate, but just also access to information, actually digital technologies are important for connecting people. So I'm not sure if a boycott it would be the best solution, but certainly some way of sharing information about what dominant forms of digital technologies are doing, and also the fact that a lot of these digital technologies are not offering neutral information. They're offering information that is specifically geared towards having farmers adopt specific practices. So it's a good question, and it's probably something to be debated among civil society and movements.
And your final points, Matt?
I think I'll leave it there. This has been a great conversation, and I would just encourage folks who are interested to read our report that is published on the BIBA website for more information. And feel free to reach out to any of us.
Thank you. Barbara, do you have a question? We
No,
are
I
giving.
just wanted to say something small regarding what we can do as African farmers and how we can have our say. Like Susan and all the discussants have mentioned, that a lot of this technology is bottom down, technology that we've been forced to embrace. And like Matt has also mentioned, that now most of our governments are pushing the digitalization agenda. And so as AfriTAP, we are in the process of coming up with a methodology and a process of evaluating these new and emerging technologies in a systematic system, where we want to bring communities to be more involved and to be and to participate in really talking about how these technologies have potential harms and how can they anticipate these harms before these technologies are actually deployed. So we intend obviously to come down to Kenya, to the local communities where these technologies are being deployed. And the goal is actually to shape the direction of how agriculture and food should look like from an African perspective. But also we want to rally political and agroecological methods for farming to be led by agroecological methods rather than relying on digitalization. So tech assessments, participatory tech assessments, we think is the way to go to raise awareness, to enhance skills, and also really to highlight the need to have a more participatory process before technologies are being deployed on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. I think, Susan, you can come in now with a final question from Dolphin Combo. How can Africa develop a digital agriculture paradigm that integrates indigenous knowledge systems with cutting-edge global biotechnology? I don't know if that's possible. Maybe, Susan, you can answer that as you give your final inputs.
I think that's a bit difficult to
Yes, you can give us your final input, Susan. Susan, your network is not very good. You're lagging. Maybe we can go to Gideon as you work on your network. Gideon?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, moderator.
Yes, Gideon, go ahead.
For me,
Can
I'd
we
just like to
mute
thank
Susan, please?
Susan,
for
kindly
me,
mute yourself. We listen to Gideon first. Your network is not good. Gideon, you have the floor.
For me, I'd like to thank everyone that who made it here today. Thank you for your time. Number two is I'd like to ask everyone, all organizations here, to actually promote digital agriculture to the youth. And when we talk about digital agriculture, I am talking about the digital agriculture that promotes agroecology and organic inputs. And number three, as we develop such technologies, let's make sure that the technologies are farmer-centered and the farmer is the primary source of knowledge. And let's ensure that these technologies promote indigenous knowledge that will ensure that our culture, our ways of life, and our ways of food production that are safe and sustainable are not lost. Thank you.
Very much, my panelists. I don't know if Susan is back. We lost her at some point, but mine is to
back.
thank you all. Susan, you're back. Give us your final
I'm
input,
back.
please.
Yes, I just wanted to say that we're not going to have that conversation without the support of AfriTAP, ETC, and AFSA. The conversation that has been started today, the research that BIBA has done, and the different spaces where we can start talking about a digital process that is for Africans, by Africans, and will develop us needs to start. And I think this is an opportunity for us to start this and then mention our priorities as a continent on where we want to take the digitalization agenda. It could be useful, it could be developmental. We need to have a conversation.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you, our panelists and our participants, for really participating and asking very hard questions, some which were not answered, but we'll endeavor to answer them. This is a series of webinars that we're speaking on technology. Our next webinar will be on the 21st of August, where we shall be speaking about technology assessment in Africa. And I would welcome you to join that. You can pick, you can get the links or the when we advertise it on our social media platforms, AfriTap, ETC, Grain, and also the AFSA website. So once again, thank you very much, and wish you a nice day, a nice evening, and I hope you learned quite a lot. Thank you.